the conference organization, incredible dinner, and then start the next session at 9 a.m.? The answer is we wanted to see who the real serious contributors to the project were. So you passed the test. Shep didn't, but really, thanks for showing up. And what was that? Yeah, we're gonna make the list. So I was actually gonna hand out special stickers, like badges. So for next time, I guess. So yeah, so in this session, what I wanted to do is kind of come back to this discussion that we started yesterday about the level 0 science goals and the science requirements review report. But instead of just kind of summarizing them from a high level perspective, really get into them from a project perspective. What's the work that we need to do to close this out? What are the big questions and so forth? But really, I don't want this to all just be me speaking. We could have done that by Zoom. The whole point is that this is interactive. So I want to have extra time for discussion here and throughout the day. Really, your input on this is incredibly valuable. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I want to start by just actually reviewing the science working group charter. So this was written before the formation of the science groups. And you can see that the priorities and the responsibilities that science working group coordinators signed up for were to coordinate the development of the level 0 science requirements and coordinate the development, submission, and review of science use cases. So this is pretty exciting, right? We're actually delivering on the core goals that these groups were set up for, in addition to facilitating different projects and different science that's related to the ngEHT. But I think we're really on track, and there's a lot to be proud of here. Now, coming back to these key science goals that were defined, this is a distillation of all the work that you've been doing over the last 18 months. And a major priority today and tomorrow is for the science working groups to discuss these and determine whether, do we need to adjust the wording a little bit? Is the prioritization correct? Are there any science goals that we think are in jeopardy because they might not actually be achievable with the array? These are things that we absolutely have to tackle as quickly as possible. So in the session after this one, we're going to hear these summary presentations from all the science working groups, going through all the science and more in much more detail. But then in the breakout sessions, that's where we've allowed extra time, and we really want there to be open discussion of these, be able to target all of the soft spots in our science case and understand what we need to prioritize. And I want to emphasize, defining this for the threshold objectives is crucial. That's going to be how we baseline our array, how we define requirements that are absolutely immutable. But it's equally important for us to flesh this out for the objective science goals as well. So there's a lot of really exciting science in here. We think that this is low-hanging fruit for the project. It's things we absolutely should be doing. And the more that we can specify the requirements associated with that today, the more that we ensure that they'll actually be built into the design. So just one example of that is, there's very rich transient science for the ngEHT. This is something the EHT hasn't touched. And it's something that a lot of sub-millimeter facilities also haven't really heavily engaged with. But we really do have the opportunity to track the dynamics of X-ray binaries over timescales of hours in ways that have never been seen before. Be able to connect with multi-wavelength and multi-messenger science, look at GRB afterglows that might be discovered with LIGO or LISA, and study potentially things like TEEs as well. So really exciting possibilities here, and the more that we can clearly define what we're after and what we need, the more likely we are to be able to make this a success. So these are the things, these guiding questions are what I hope that we'll circle back to again and again, both in the plenaries and in the breakouts, so that we can understand exactly where we're at as a project. Now, I wanted to go through some of the feedback from the science requirements review in a little bit more detail. And again, this is a really good opportunity for us. Jim Moran is here, who is the chair of the panel. The panel put a lot of thought into going through all of our presentations and target where the weak points are. I think they wrote a really constructive report. All the science working group coordinators have seen it, and they gave feedback on every single science working group. So their questions are the ones that we have to answer. Some of these might be trivial, a simple misunderstanding, but most of them are suggesting detailed studies that we need to execute, then write white papers on, and then summarize at a high level in the science traceability matrix. So I see this as a punch list for us as a collaboration and a real clear guide to defining major questions of significant importance that we need to tackle. So just to summarize, the panel noted some major strengths in the science that was presented. You know, they say there's a broad range of science opportunities, including new physics, accretion flow around supermassive black holes, and so forth. Opportunity to extend to new targets is very exciting. They said the science cases are ambitious, and successful observations will contribute to major efforts that are conducted or planned across the electromagnetic spectrum, and many exciting possibilities for profound discovery. Okay, this is huge. If we didn't have that, if we didn't have compelling science, we would not build this instrument. But we have checked that box, and that's something that I think we need to really be proud of. They also gave us focused feedback on prioritization. So they said for the fundamental physics science working group, study the photon ring phenomenon appears to be the most exciting of the three key objectives. Okay, that is why it's elevated to a threshold priority in the STM. They said detecting the detection of black hole spin in a sample of 10 objects is the most compelling case proposed for the black holes in their cosmic context working group. Again, that's why it's elevated to a threshold objective, and that is a very difficult science case. So that tells us if we can really legitimize this and make sure that it's feasible, that would be a major achievement. They also gave feedback on the other groups, you know, some feedback there on accretion, and then also some questions about, you know, things that we need to understand a little bit better. And in particular, they said the team should work to derive and document a single list of level 0 science requirements that are based on these parameters, requirement lists from the other science working groups into a single table that has traceability, each of the individual key science goals. So obviously, you know, we're well on our way there through defining the STM. Okay, now the panel also identified major weaknesses, and this is the most helpful part of the report for us. They said the science case has not been made in enough detail to allow us a concise definition of the proposed instrument. The requirement of better than 10 microarcsecond angular resolution, requiring super resolution techniques with enough fidelity to deliver scientifically reliable movies of active accretion demands rigorous simulation work, right? They're saying they're not convinced. We have to go back, you know, we know the science we're after, we know it's exciting, we know it would be transformative, but we have not demonstrated that it's feasible. And this can't just be one person doing one thing and convincing themselves. We have to figure out how to come up with a community consensus that these are realistic science goals. So that's a heavy lift, and it's something that we need to discuss throughout the meeting. I mean, I thought Jim kicked off this discussion in a wonderful way with his talk yesterday, but we have to decide, you know, what's it going to take to define and to demonstrate this in a way that everyone will believe. They said there are no clear-cut forecasts that demonstrate in a quantitative way how the ngEHT will improve on currently available results. You know, we have to differentiate between EHT and ngEHT and really show that a new facility is required. They highlighted, you know, that detecting spin in 10 sources is the most exciting science case, right, for the BHCC, but they said the presentations didn't spell out what's truly required for those spin measurements. And again, we have not even claimed the spin measurement for M87, right? Our best target has been studied in exquisite detail. So we have to lay out the path to get a robust spin measurement for M87 and then explain why we think that we can do this for 10 more sources that are barely resolved. So these aren't easy questions, but progress on any of them would be a major achievement. And this is why we have the white papers. So the things that we've done as a project to try to address this are that we've defined these reference arrays for one. So in the early days of preparing for this science requirements review, the groups were working with very nebulous concepts of what the instrument was. We're now saying, here's a concrete example where you can do end-to-end simulations. You don't have to do any guesswork. we're not expecting you to be experts on instrument design or simulation. We'll do that for you. The question is, can we connect this to the exciting science? So we're trying to draw on the strengths all across the project to make sure that not too much expectations or burden are being placed on any one group or individual. Now, I want to come back to the STM again and just highlight kind of how it's structured, the way it's structured, and why we did things, and make sure that if you have questions about what these columns mean, that we have a chance to discuss that and come to a common understanding. So for these key science goals, these are straight out of the working group white papers. There really shouldn't be any surprises here, and if they are, that's something we have to discuss immediately. I think we've discussed already threshold and objective requirements and what those mean, and of course the target is pretty obvious. These columns of physical, parameter, and observable are actually extremely subtle. So they're differentiating between the thing that we're trying to actually measure and the thing that we're actually observing to make that inference. In some science cases, this is pretty obvious. In others, it's actually quite difficult to pin down. So this is something that I think in some cases can be a topic of a lot of discussion and refinement. Now, the operational configuration, this is absolutely crucial. We have to know what science cases are possible with near-term configurations and which ones are the longer-term configurations. Once we make that split, then we can more cleanly define the observing requirements and array requirements for each phase. So this is based on simulation work. And some of these have been vetted extensively, some of them are only lightly studied. But this is something where we really need to come to terms with the exact array that's required for every single row in this table. And I think by breaking it down, case by case and not trying to do all in one pass, we have a better shot at giving specific answers. The mode and the cadence are also crucial. So defining, if we want to make a movie of M87, how big of a gap can we have? There was discussion about this yesterday. There was a lot of skepticism that we could actually observe regularly every 3 nights because of weather limitations. So this is a multi-part answer. Part of it's coming from theory. We're trying to say we have a theoretical expectation for the source evolution timescales, and that sets the maximum gap between observations. And then the other half of it is coming from observations. So that's the half that we've done for you. We've integrated weather and realistic observing conditions into the simulations so that if there are questions about, we don't think that's possible because of X, we'll be able to say, well, we incorporated that, and that's part of our simulated limitations. So we have to meet in the middle there, but it's really important that all the science working groups review these requirements and make sure that they're reasonable. Now, for the array requirements, these are also a little confusing. For a lot of these science cases, for instance, you would say 86 gigahertz is crucial, let's say for phase transfer and sensitivity. But that is not what this table is about. This is just defining what is the observation that's like the baseline observation requirements to deliver the science. It's not asking about sensitivity, for instance, or calibration strategies or anything like that. It's just saying, what sky frequencies with observations detailed here would actually lead you to the proposed science. So we might learn later that to actually do observations at 230 and 345 gigahertz of faint targets, it might require observations at 86 gigahertz to do phase transfer. That's okay. Then it's a downstream requirement. But here we're really trying to stay as high level as possible so that each of these requirements is directly tied to the science, not to an instrument requirement. The other thing we're trying to do, and we talked about this yesterday, is differentiate between science cases that rely on, say, conventional imaging versus ones that rely on model fitting. Maybe there are other categories of measurements as well. So we want to give as much specificity as we can here. And so if groups have ideas about how to articulate these in a clearer way, that will avoid problems like us putting down a requirement for 5 microarc second resolution that just triggers a knee-jerk reaction that's just impossible. That's really vital to us presenting this in a way that the community will accept. Okay, now simulations. How do we actually justify all of the different cells in the STM? So the first thing I want to point to is, this app that was developed by Avery Broderick, the ngEHT Explorer app. This was a really powerful tool for us in November. It's still active. Avery's here at the meeting. I encourage you to ask him questions about it. This is a great way to do quick and dirty. You handed it an image and an array configuration, and it spits back a reasonable first guess at the baseline coverage. It's not doing intensive imaging or weather modeling, but it's a fairly credible model that should get you started and should give you a pretty good sense of whether something is wildly optimistic or totally impossible or more feasible than you might have expected. So there's a lot of development work that was put into this, and I think willingness to continue expanding it. But I think that this is a really useful tool for getting things going. Now, the other part of this is the full end-to-end simulations. This is something that's really being pioneered by Craig Roloffs and Lindy Blackburn and Greg Lindahl and others across the ngEHT team. But they typically rely on two data generation codes, either EHT imaging or SIMBA. And they start with the most physically realistic source model that we have. So for a lot of these, we're using state-of-the-art GRMHD simulations. And then if we're looking at ZJ-STAR, we add full effects of scattering in the ionized interstellar medium. So we're relying on decades of work to give credible starting models there. Now, after that, these codes simulate the effects of absorption, emission, and turbulence in the atmosphere. So they're adding phase scrambling, they're adding the effects of opacity, and they're using site-by-site weather modeling that's based on historical meteorology. So these are actually taking into account how the weather is changing in each site over the year, generating random realizations, or actually pulling historical data. And I think that this answers a lot of questions about the viability of year-round observations. So you don't have to be an expert in that. All this is already developed. Next, they simulate the effects of the aperture. So here we're integrating information from the systems team about antenna performance, the known antenna performance at existing sites, or the projected performance at new sites. Again, you don't have to be an expert in this. It's all integrated, and I think it addresses a lot of the major concerns. They also integrate things like pointing errors. This can be a big deal for some of the new ngEHT dishes. And we are adding, of course, the telescope locations to determine UV coverage, the observing frequencies and bandwidths that are actually being planned for ngEHT, reasonable observing schedules, calibration pipelines, and so forth. So these have a huge amount of machinery into them so that you can rely on to give credible predictions. Now, we've identified several things in the project already that are major outstanding questions that cut across multiple science or technical working groups. And so for these, we're creating dedicated task forces to try to make progress on these crucial questions. So one example is that we created an 86 gigahertz task force trying to assess what science can be done there, how it affects calibration, and the opportunities that it enables. So this is now very mature. They have a white paper that's nearly finished, and they'll deliver a report to the whole collaboration about the utility of this. Next is there's going to be a targets task force. This isn't off the ground yet. I'm hoping that several of those in the audience will participate here, but we've seen that monitoring and surveys are key modes for the ngEHT. We want to detect 10 or maybe 100 new black holes. We don't know the path to doing that. We don't know if it's going to take a massive amount of time on ngEHT or other facilities. And so we're going to have a dedicated task force to figure this out and make a recommendation to the project. And we already talked about the white papers. So let me just move to the summary. I think we've made fantastic progress in defining the ngEHT science case. We are approaching our baseline deliverables, and that's just wonderful. We had this review, which provided down select prioritization and focused testing of our key science goals. And we have to respond to that now. We have to take all of this feedback on those soft spots in our science case and make sure that we can substantiate it. So the white papers are a big step there, both high level ones that are summarizing things across a whole working group. But justifying a single cell on a threshold science objective could be worth writing an entire white paper about. Right? These are major science priorities for the community, and they're going to be high impact papers. So please don't be shy about suggesting white papers. Discuss what's missing in your working group and figure out what's needed to get to close out the major questions. If it's a white paper, let's document that. If it requires a task force or something bigger or project support, let us know, and we'll get that off the ground. And what better time to do it than this week when we're all here in person. So again, thanks so much. I think it'll be a really fun day to discuss these items, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so now there is some time for questions for Michael. Thank you very much, Michael, for giving the review of the status of the project, science review, the needs for the simulation, the task forces. This looks really nice. So questions, please. Yeah, see Pablo.
Yes. Well, thanks very much, Michael. It's really fantastic how you are pre-designing all this and how you offer the community the chance to participate in the design. I have a question about the 3mm capability and the relation with the global millimeter BLBA array. So is this something that you plan to just put in some telescopes that now cannot do the 3mm? Is this something that will cooperate or somehow collaborate with the GMBA to extend even further this 3mm science? I was just wondering about that part.
Yeah, so I think the 3mm task force had a pretty sprawling charge, but one thing that they're definitely interested in is connecting with existing facilities. They've been particularly focused on the NG-BLA, but of course the GMBA is another major option there. And interleaving GMBA and ngEHT observations would be wonderful, right? That gives us very dense coverage at all these wavelengths and chance for multi-frequency synthesis. There's also the possibility, they're also thinking about for sites that have 3mm receivers, maybe you can add higher frequency receivers as well and do phase transfer to enable those higher frequency observations at sites that wouldn't typically be thought of as 1mm sites. So Ramo also mentioned this in his talk. I think it's a really exciting possibility. So this is part of what they're studying. If you have input on that, I really encourage you to get in touch with Sarah or some of the other leads on this project. And I think it's a really important opportunity to link these projects and make the most of all these telescopes around the world.
Yeah, thank you very much.
More common and more questions for Michael. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Michael. It was a very good presentation. I was going to ask you about the panel summary that you got back, and specifically on the question of whether the observational requirements can be met by the ngEHT. Can you expand a little bit more on that? What did they mean by that?
For which one?
The last point.
The major weaknesses.
Yeah.
Okay, let me clarify a couple things. The panel wrote a detailed report. It was thorough and very helpful. This is a course summary of it that I made. So if things seem kind of dangling here, that's just because I'm summarizing a detailed document. So I think when they made these objections, it was typically with respect to specific stated observing requirements. So it might be with respect specifically to super resolution to 5 microarcseconds of photon ring. It might be specifically with respect to detecting 10 millijansky targets and characterizing the black hole shadows. It's not like they really gave blanket statements of, we don't really believe what you're doing. So I guess I'm not sure if the technical working groups got the report, but I'm happy to distribute it to to you and other leads, and And I think it'd be really good to get your input on whether it affects any design considerations in particular.
Yeah, please. Sorry, I cannot see you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Michael, for a very inspiring presentation. Many thoughts which come as a result of you in this viewers. I would like to play a little bit of evil advocate. From the experience of our community involved in many large projects, like, for example, SPA or that scale of space, it is usually a very difficult task to struggle with funding agencies when you present something which is very dear to your own heart, but it is not, well, they like the word transformational. And usually, if you want to quantify this, it means that at least one observing parameter must be better by at least an order of magnitude than something before that. Somewhere here, I saw a figure of cost. I believe this is iteration cost, the order of 10 to $8. By the way, very impressive that it's calculated or shown, simulated with up to decimal. But when it comes to this sort of amount, it is absolutely crucial to show something which would justify this level. So my question is, whether it's possible to show for ngEHT something which will be order of magnitude, or maybe more, 1.5 order of magnitude, better than what can be achieved with the current instrumentation, current level of operation cost, etc. The last statement from me. Here in this audience, I don't believe it is necessary to convince how exciting it would be ngEHT. Sure, we all believe it is. But the problem is that we have to convince communities outside of this room. And that requires something really transformational.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Agreed on the decimal point here. The overflow is, I don't know, we'll get it on, well, anyway, we'll crowdfund the ngEHT. And in terms of transformational science, the n equals 1 photon ring is sharper by a factor of e to the minus pi. So that's a factor of 20 improvement in revolution if we can lock onto that feature. We're talking about extending observations of M87 from currently a week in duration, where you see a snapshot, to continuous over many months or potentially years. Right, so that's another area where we get factors of more than an order of magnitude improvement. For the number of sources, we're talking about expanding from 2 targets to potentially 100. Right, our baseline is 10 for these gold standard sources, but there could be a population to explore. So I actually think there are a lot of elements of our science case where we do have these factor of 10 improvements, and we need to sharpen our high level science case. We have too many goals. And so we might have to do another cut to say we're doing these 3 things that are absolutely transformative, competitive with next generation facilities at other wavelengths, and that will put us in the vanguard when we're trying to raise these funds and get community support. So I agree with what you're saying. I think it's partly messaging, and I want to stay focused on closing out the STM and understanding our requirements. But then I think we have to come back to this and make sure that we really know what are our 10x improvements. And how do we make sure that we're selling this in the most compelling way possible?
Thank you very much. I think we should move on. Thank you again, Michael. Okay, and now we have Shep Doeleman. He's going to give us an overall project goal, timeline, and the packet report.
Everybody hear me? Sorry for the slight change in order here. This is what happens when you have a dinner at the Alhambra late at night. Okay, good morning, everybody. So this is round 2 of the I'm going to talk about the project goals overall, the timeline, and I'll touch on the project advisory committee, which is an integral and very important part of the ngEHT. One of the things that the EHT has not yet done is to convene a group of outside experts who can guide the project overall. And we're very fortunate to have a wonderful group of very high-level senior astronomers and scientists who can help guide us, not just in terms of funding, but also in terms of science, logistics, and some of the political landscape that any large facility is going to face in the coming decade. So this is a general idea of the roadmap of the ngEHT. I'm not sure if everybody can read everything on here, but it starts over here with the science that Michael just talked about, with a number of science working groups. And one of the cornerstones of the ngEHT is that we're going to get community input early on in the process. At the same time, we're looking at some of the fixed constraints about what kind of array we can build here, costs and the site, and emerges through this very well-defined systems engineering process, some of these fundamental key science goals, and the science traceability matrix that Michael just talked about, operations concept that Jen has talked about yesterday, and then evolving the system requirements. Okay, so if you zoom in on the first part here, the first 2 ngEHT science meetings were the focus of this area right here. I think it's a really nice job, help us, Michael, and maybe and others, to nail down all the different kinds of science. And then, as Michael just described, we did a science requirements review on February 4th this year, which happened right here. And then as a subsequent reaction to that, we went through a relatively intense period of simulations, very targeted simulations, trying to find out how we can refine and sharpen the science case. And the questions we asked in the science requirements review were, are these science goals transformative? We just talked about that today. Are they achievable? What are the key simulations? What are the outstanding questions? And have array requirements been identified? We've gone through this careful process. With the EHT, it was much different, of course. We had one basic primary concept, and we did not have to necessarily decide what the best way of getting all the science was. We had a very worthy goal. And it was very easy to think about all the technical upgrades we were going to need at all the different sites and what we're going to need to do at Alma. Because if we were taking electronics to existing sites and not building electronics from the ground up. Now, if we look a little bit farther into the future over here, we just had the system requirements review, and that's just what Aaron's going to talk about here. That's going to lead to refinements of the system requirements and the system architecture. And the success criteria for the system requirements review were relatively simple, but very important to state. I want to say at the outset that we really embraced a systems engineering approach to how we build the ngEHT, which is oriented best practices, and we'll need that if we're going to go for the kinds of funding levels that Michael was talking about earlier. So, are these the next level of system requirements? Do they meet the level 0 requirements, and are they achievable? Is the project mature to the point of concept design? Do we have a sound process for allocation, control of requirements? Do we have the right interfaces in the project? Is it credible to be built within the expected resources? And have all the risks been identified? And are there any outstanding items, and do we have a plan to deal with them? The kind of questions you'd want to ask a visionary project that you want to hold accountable. Now, in part of this, you will have noticed that this element was in part of the original diagram. We asked ourselves, what are the key technical areas we need to make progress on in this project? And the technical working groups were formed to promote strong international collaboration and accelerate early stage development of the ngEHT array. This was our idea to canvas very broadly, to be capacious, as it were, of all the different concepts that are out there. So if you think about correlation, what are all the options for correlating 100 petabytes of data? If you need to make dual band receivers, what are all the technologies one might employ? If you extend that to 3 bands to 86, what are all the options, for example? And we asked members from across the international community to lead these. So this was not led by one group, not led by one region even. These were led by groups of international scientists. We have 3 installed so far: the receiver working group, the digital backend, data management, and they're coming with design recommendations, just broadly, to survey the state of the technical state of affairs across the globe, and they'll feed into the element requirements and then the system requirements. So these are some of the efforts that are ongoing. I saw Michael touched on 1 or 2 of these, but we have a digital backend working group, being helmed by Jonathan Weintraub and Alan Roy from Max Planck, and then Smithsonian. And they're looking very, very broadly at all different types of technologies for down conversion and digitization as we move to 256 gigabits per second. And they're putting a focus on commercial off-the-shelf technologies for the high-speed recorders that we'll need. Not just the recorders themselves, but also the media. And you can see here, I think Ranjani and John Test in the lab doing some work. The ngEHT receiver working group, of course, is led by Gopal Narayan and Ray Blundell at SAO. And this covers all the different elements of the 230, 345 gigahertz design to maximize bandwidth. Also looking at the inclusion of 86 gigahertz. You can see here one of the 1 millimeter mixer blocks that's already being built into the prototype receiver. On the data management side, Lindy Blackburn at SAO and Mark Ketnes from Jive are leading this effort to look very, very broadly at how you correlate large quantities of data. Do you use an existing cluster? Do you go to the cloud? So we're not being parochial about this. We want to know any different possibilities that might achieve this data throughput. How do you transport the data? It's quite difficult to think about how to get so much data back from the South Pole, for example, how we'll get data back from around the world with a central correlation facility, and what the calibration strategies are. In addition to those technical working groups, we had some targeted areas. I think Michael touched on a couple of these. Site selection is, of course, extremely important. Where are you going to put all of these dishes? I've listed a couple of the people here that are working very, very hard on that. They're looking at historical weather and opacity. We've already had a paper come out on the best sites around the globe to do this, but also looking at in situ WBR measurements. Alex Raymond here, who has since moved on to JPL, came up with a very, very interesting and novel approach using an infrared diode that for a very low cost can be put in the field very, very rapidly to get in situ measurements. And, we have about 3, 4, 5 of those in operation around the globe so far. And then Michael went talk about this a little bit. The 86 gigahertz task force, led by Dom, Sarah, and Frank, is looking at how we can add 86 gigahertz. And this is a UV coverage of all the 86 gigahertz coverage one might get if you add the ngEHT dishes. And what the science impact will be, interoperability with, let's say, the ngVLA, and also the benefits, as we'll hear from Maria Rioja and others, on phase transfer to the 230 and 345 gigahertz bands. So I want to spend a few minutes on the timeline here. So we're, of course, somewhere right around here. We had a systems requirements review. Where do we plan it to be in just a couple of years? So after the system requirements review, we're prioritizing science goals, looking at all the design considerations, doing site selection. We've already showed phase 1, phase 2 for that. And we're also looking around to form initial partnerships with some of the new sites and some of the new technical centers that are helping us design the hardware. That didn't. So what this actually should say here is the outstanding architecture questions. I'll just list some of those right here. How many new sites do we need? How much observation time do we need? We had some very good questions to to Janice yesterday about observation timelines. We actually need an LMT, for example, in these sites. And again, the data transport, we still don't know what the best modes for that will be. The size of the dish, which is the optimal mix. We have to balance between some of the existing dishes that we might refurbish and what kind of new dishes we'll build from the ground up. The 86 gigahertz question, and how to scale the instrumentation design to supply the new ngEHT sites, upgrade the existing ones. So that'll take us to the concept design review here. And here we really have to focus on how we're going to meet these requirements, complete all the major design trades, plans for verifying all these science goals, and programmatic review of cost and schedule. So again, we're hearing the best practices of systems engineering, because we'll have to do that when we come to the large funding agencies for a project of this scope. And then this is going to lead us to the pre-proposal for the MSRI2. So currently we're funded at the $13 million level from the mid-scale research infrastructure -1 proposal. And we also have the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation funds at the level of $7 million. But we'll have to go for a much larger proposal in the 2023 timeframe. And here we'll have to solidify the phase 1 and phase 2 sites. I have vendors for the antenna completely selected with full designs. Have the final concept of operations that Janice was showing us the beginnings of, and make sure we've passed all of our reviews so far. This will also be important for getting commitment from sites. We'll have to go in with the next round of funding with commitment from the sites, which we've negotiated beforehand. And the last part here, towards 2024, we'll have the OVRO LMT fringe test that Janice described yesterday. The PDR will have been done, and we'll have the fringe test readiness review before this. There's a lot that's going to happen in this time frame. I'm not going to read all of this off here, but it's going to wind up with a go, no go for operational support fringe test, and then go through all of the normal reviews one would expect for a project of this scope. And I'm going to wind up here by describing a bit the project advisory committee. It's an integral part of what we do. And as I said at the outset, what has been missing, in my opinion, from the Event Horizon Telescope has been an advisory committee that can advise at the highest level across many, many different areas. And we're very fortunate to have this group of people advising us. We have Barry Barish, who brings with him decades of experience on a very, very large scientific collaboration. He's the LIGO Director Emeritus. Tony Beasley, of course, is the NREO Director. Julian Del Canton directs the CCA, the Flatiron Institute. Phil Diamond probably needs no introduction. He's Director General of the Square Kilometer Array. Jim Gates is the APS President. Gabby Gonzalez, also involved with LIGO. Priya, in the audience here, is Professor at Yale and also leading one of the ngEHT science groups. Tatiana Venturi is Director of the Radio Institute in ENOF. Cliff Will, one of the senior members in testing GR. And John Wondersley was the director of a very large facility in Europe, has a great deal of experience bringing multiple countries together in the European arena. And we asked them specifically to advise us on science objectives, technical developments, anything having to do with schedule, design choices, trade-offs, cost model. Very importantly, workforce engagement. How do we deal with diversity, personnel issues, industry connections, and the international collaboration landscape? They've met in October 12th. We have their report in hand, and this report is materially shaping and helping how we approach the project. So the project advisory committee gave us the report, and this happens in context. So the Astro 2020 decadal review, after they met and before we got the report weighed in, they said the specific ideas and structures and architecture that we had drafted for input to the Astro 2020 report presents an interesting concept for expansion. We had originally said 10-meter diameter telescopes, and it would help improve imaging and quadrupling reporting bandwidth and so forth. And they said a logical first step towards a full MSRI2 scale proposal. The limit of this would be about $100 million. Would be completion of the design and prototyping work that has been funded through the MSRI1 awards. We have, in my view, a green light to go from where we are now with the MSRI-1 award to an MSRI-2, which is significantly enhanced in scope. Since then, we had discussions, particularly with the NSF. And the NSF guided us in the following way. These are through monthly calls we have with the large facilities office and with the astronomy divisions. And then also in the context of getting a supplement for the MSRI-1, which will help all the current US stakeholders account for the fact that we had a year delay due to COVID. And they advised us to phase their funding requests. So the very idea of having a phase 1 and a phase 2 for the ngEHT comes directly from advice from the National Science Foundation. And particularly the Project Advisory Committee report said they recommend that the PI explore the definition of a reduced scope but phased scientifically viable project that can be constructed and operated as the first phase of a future international collaboration. So they see the wisdom of doing something quickly, getting something on the ground that can be transformative. We think that it can be for phase 1, and then move towards a phase 2, which has significant international collaboration. So this is what informs the ideas that we've been showing on the first day today of having a phase 1 and another phase 2. I'm not going to go into this too much because we talked about this before, but phase 1 has a critical enhancement of the current array, and we're working very closely with Ramo, others, Jeff, in the EHT to make this a common goal across the ngEHT and the EHT. And then by the time you get to phase 2, you have considerable UV coverage here, allowing us to make movies and achieve the goals that Michael talked about just prior to this. And you wind up getting close to an order of magnitude in the number of baselines. So I'm going to leave it here. The goals that we've discussed today and yesterday are the science traceability matrix. I urge everyone to take a very, very close look at that matrix. It's the result of a lot of work by Michael, Avery, others, Jose, and it represents the considered opinion of multiple experts around the globe on what we can do in phases. The timeline is aligned with new proposals for the MSRI-2, and the PAC is giving us, I think, some excellent advice. And we look forward to the next meeting, which is going to happen early in the fall on the entire project, and in many ongoing studies from the technical working groups to the Tiger teams that we've installed for 86 other things are helping to refine our approach. So with that, I'll just take some questions.
Thanks a lot, Shep. Questions, comments, Shep? Yeah, so you can see your things. Publish.
I can't, is it on?
Is it on?
Yeah, yeah.
My question is as an outsider, not an EHT, so I'm not sure quite what we've got access to, and I haven't seen on the screen the traceability matrix or the requirements from the SKA who had some exposure to this. But is that available to ngEHT people, or is it internal EHT people? I'm not sure if that's given share as widely as it could.
Okay, that's a great question. Let me ask Michael, is that available for anybody who wants to see it, the STM?
Yeah, it's share the link that was prepared.
It's not on.
I can ask if we have a one-off kind of exchange. Should there not be a policy to encourage the doctors to also be able to see these things at home rather than having one by one request?
Yeah, so actually Aaron has done a great job creating kind of project repositories for track the level of project documents. The SDM is part of that. We are trying to do it in a a clear kind of data responsible way. We don't want 10 versions floating around and in them, so it's been kind of a very strict process. But absolutely, it's meant to be shared by everyone. So I think the goal for this week to figure out what we need to consolidate and make sure that one
Yeah, I think the answer is that the STM has just come into focus in I think the last month, because we had the systems requirements review, and we rushed to take all the considered opinion of the science working groups and got it all streamlined into the current version of the STM. But this is something that will be available broadly.
More comments on questions for Shep? Okay, thank you very much, Shep. And I think we'll move to the next floor. Aaron, Oppenheimer is going to give us an overview of the system requirements and as well as a report for the system requirement.
At the world's driest croissant for breakfast. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Aaron Oppenheimer. You probably have one or more emails from me in your inbox. I'm here this morning to represent the systems engineering team. This way. No. That way. Yeah. The systems engineering team for the ADHD program is a large team with a diverse set of backgrounds. Here they are listed across the bottom. You've probably seen presentations on process and engineering from Garrett Fitzpatrick, our project engineer who could not be here. And this work also includes plenty of input from Shep, Michael, Lindy, the MSRI team, the science working groups, the technical working groups. And so really the job here is to understand the science goals and start to move them into engineering requirements, which will describe the thing that we can actually build. So we'll talk about requirements first. Let's see. Hey, so this is the science crazy building matrix that you've all just seen a couple times. So down the left side are the science goals, and in those columns to the right are performance metrics describing an array or a system that could plausibly meet those science goals. For any given performance metric, there are different numbers in those columns depending on the science goal. So it's the work of the systems engineering team to take everything left of this diagram here and start to turn it into things on the right side of the diagram. So the operations concept for Janice talked about yesterday, the level 1 requirements that I'm talking about now. Once those things are in shape, we can then start to put together a picture of what a system would actually look like to meet the science goals. So the operations concept of Janice discussed yesterday is a basic description of how do we use a system, what are the operating modes, and how do we think about the actual use of the facility. The level 1 requirements describe what that system has to do. It doesn't describe how it does it, it just is this sort of handshake between the engineering group and the science group, where we all agree, yes, this is the thing we're going to build, and if we build it, it meets science goals. So we talk a lot about requirements, but it's possible, maybe likely, that most of you haven't actually seen what a requirement looks like to the engineering team. So here's an example. On the left side, this is a piece of output from the tool that we use to manage the requirements. I'll talk a little bit about how those requirements are managed in a second. And here's a simple example. The array has the shell head capability to observe at 2 and 3 different simultaneously. Doesn't say how we're going to do it. It just says this is what we're going to do. There's two important things missing though here, which are actually part of the requirement. One is the rationale. Why do we think this is important? For the top level requirements, mostly these rationales are because the science goals tell us we need to do this. As we get further down into the detailed subsystem design, then we start talking in the rationale about why we decided this design was better. So everything is going on. The other thing that's crucial in the development requirement is a verification plan. How do we know that we actually met this requirement? Especially in the top level requirement where we haven't even built anything yet. There's no way to test it. If we were talking about a low level subsystem, you know, the recorder has to record at some bandwidth, but we can build one and test it and find out. If we are saying, well, this array, which will be at these different sites that we haven't actually built yet, can meet these goals, how do we know that we met it? And so the verification requirement for something like that is a test. It's a simulation. It's an agreement between the engineering team and the science team that, yeah, once we have a design, it's the right design, we'll run these simulations and all agree that, yes, this will plausibly be science. And again, this describes what we're doing, not how we're doing it. And the systems architecture, which we'll get to in a second, starts to get to the how. The level 1 system requirements are just one of a large number of documents that the engineering team develops to describe what the system has to do and how it's going to do it, and what were the trade-offs that got us there, and how we need to do it. So all of these things are linked together formally and enforced through a requirements management tool that we use to ensure that if anything changes, it will change all the time. But if anything changes, all the things that are linked to that requirement are flagged. So if the science team comes to us and says, hey, we really do want a 60 difference in here for a science reason, well, we may add a new level 1 requirement, and that will flag all of the level 2 requirements that are connected to our level 1 requirements that might be affected by that change. Similarly, if something changes at a low level, the subsystem, that we specified, it turns out we can't actually deliver. Well, we can then trace the low level requirements all the way back up to the science case and say, well, which science case is this really and this ensures us that as we move forward, nothing changes in our understanding of what's going to be built unless everybody knows what those things are. When the documents are controlled, we have a change control board that meets ostensibly every month to review any changes that have to be made to the documents and to assess the impact on the rest of the program. So the process is pretty iterative. We write a set of requirements, or we write an architecture document. It gets distributed, it gets reviewed, we update it, we distribute it and review it some more. Once we're all agreed that we're all in agreement with the content, we baseline it, meaning we freeze it, we publish it, although we're publishing in process versions along the way, and then we control it, as I said. So nothing changes once it's under change control, unless the appropriate people have seen it and signed off on the changes. Just a little bit more color to the system requirements review that we held a couple of weeks ago. So this was a view of pretty mature version of the requirements. And so we can see over the science and technical abilities, the MSRI's authorities are kind of extra experts, some of whom were very, very knowledgeable on our exact application, and some of them were less so involved in practices. So the report from the expert review panel is forthcoming. There was general agreement that the requirements are on target, and we had plenty of feedback for how to sharpen those things and clarify them. There were plenty of questions about not only technical specifics, but also operational plans, how we fit in with the ngEHT model and what has to change moving forward. So that's very helpful. And again, our next steps are to incorporate all the feedback, respond to the review panel, baseline publish. that point, the level 1 requirements are done. And then we get to design a system. So the system architecture, well, this is our first attempt to describe how system will actually live on. Level 1 requirement says what we have to do. The architecture is going to start to say how we're going to do it. From that system architecture will come level 2 requirements. So these are now performance requirements on the subsystems. So once we say, well, our system architecture requires us to have 10 stations, and here's where they're going to go. Well, now level 2 requirements will start to say what each of those stations has to do. So the same way as level 1 requirements, level 2 requirements are a list of what has to be done. From there will come subsystem architectures that describe how it's a very methodical approach, and it seems slow, and it seems like the requirements at every level are like, yeah, you're kidding. We've been talking about simultaneous optimization for a long time. Now all we do is wait. But it's critical. It's critical that everybody understands what we're building, that we all agree at every step that we're all building the same thing, and that those things are feasible. So, as Shep alluded to, there are a lot of questions. Where should we put these new dishes, and how big should they be, and what frequencies we're looking at? Can we actually build subsystems that can handle this increased bandwidth data? How do we think about upgrading current ngEHT data antennas? How do we reduce the general time to science? And there are programmatic concerns. How do we fund this? How do we staff it? What agreements do we need with other institutions? How do new stations and operating modes work with existing ngEHT structures? And even what we envision doing not observing as part of ngEHT, we assume that these stations will be built in partnership with other institutions. Those institutions may want to use the stations for their own purposes outside of ngEHT. What features does that mean the stations need to have in order to facilitate those sorts of uses? We have lots of ways of talking about the answers to these questions. So we'll talk a little bit about simulations and cross-modeling. There are ongoing IT efforts, but we do a lot more about obviously reviews in the community, the science changes, the vendors tell us things that are available or not available, and funding of it changes over time. So just as a very quick example, and there's a whole lot more about this in the talk that Glenn will give tomorrow on how we're selecting sites. So Shep mentioned that we started with a list of 70-ish candidate sites. And we're now in the process of deciding which 10 of those are the best ones. Now, the real question is what the best mean. And that is a subject of ongoing work. What does best mean for a science case might have a different definition. So in this particular case, we got through our existing ngEHT sites. The orange dots are the presumed baseline ngEHT sites. The white dots are possible phase 2 sites. And we'll talk about this very much all, except to say that, well, through simulation, we can brute force sites. We can say, well, here's 70, let's choose combinations of 10 and run performance simulations and find out which ones perform the best for different times. So there are 35,000 combinations of sites, and some of them are high performance and just different metrics, and some of them are great performance. Okay, so but we can't just look at the top performers because there's costs. So at the same time as performance modeling, we have a very sophisticated and getting sharper with a cost model, which takes into account the cost of the equipment, the cost of the facility, staffing the facility, managing all the data. All that can go into the tool, and kind of gets turned and what comes out, we have estimates of the cost to build a thing and to operate it. When we take these in combination with the performance metrics, well, what we find is the best performing sites might not be the cheapest sites that are cheapest sites. So that's what we're looking at. To really understand what's the price performance trade-off And where is the best bang for the buck? How can we deliver the best performance for the money we think we will have? And how much extra money would it take to get a significant performance improvement? And again, I really urge you to. So, aside from that sort of work, there's a lot of ongoing R&D, which Shep mentioned. Prototyping going on for the receiver and TVs. The 86 years working group, correlation, and there are talks on all these things, almost all these things, today and tomorrow. So we can find out, answers to questions like what's technically possible, and then we can make decisions about, okay, what do we actually want to incorporate into the system architecture. So next steps for the engineering effort. So answer all those questions that I posed earlier, and input from this group is not only welcome, but it's needed. We are keeping this process as open as we possibly can. And so as we develop preliminary versions of the documents, we get circulated, and input is absolutely accepted. We continue the process of developing and finding out, and then head toward conceptual design review. Here, conceptual design review is a review of the system architecture. Okay, now tell us how you're going to meet all of those requirements that we all agreed to for level 1, which includes a lot of detail about not only the design of the system, but the effort required to operate it and support it, what it will take to verify mission, what those budgets look like, and then updates to all the programmatic documents that are governing how we're actually doing our work. So the process I described before of requirements review and document control and how we publish documents, all of those things are written down, and we are in a process of continually updating those things. Again, you've seen several versions of this. We've just passed the first red triangle on the left. This is the requirements review. This is how to reach me. And that's it. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Comments and any questions, Ron? Yeah, Richard.
Hi. We went through all of this for the FAA, and scientists have a really interesting experience of on conversation on language. The problem, because one problem, so many documents were generated that nobody could read them all, and document rot is set in, so most of those are wrong in some way. Do you have some sort of control of that? Somewhere in the internet? You've got a small team, and it just ends up with too much work to the interesting down and reviewing and updating.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And the challenge is really well. So making sure that the connections between the documents are secure enough so that when things change, they get properly wriggled through the rest of the system. Right, so any specification that we send to a vendor and say, hey, this is the addition we're doing. If something changes in the higher level requirements, our process needs to make sure that that ripples down to to the vendor as quickly and as efficiently as possible. In terms of controlling just the number of documents, the team is well aware of this. We have all done this for other projects. It definitely be a problem. And so really the trick is really understanding and making sure that the broader community gets access to the documents that are really going to be informative and are not inundated with documents that are not interesting to you. They're all interesting to us. Most of them are interesting to us. But it's a matter of being selective while also being as open as we can be. It's definitely an issue with systems engineering in general, right? Everybody wants everything documented, but we're not building airplanes, we're not building spacecraft. Janice actually was with yesterday, has built spacecraft. She knows how crazy that can be. And so it's an excellent point. And all I can tell you is, yeah, it's hard.
Thank you, it was a great call. And at one point there's a kind of idealized diagram of performance and price. And I wondered, in the real world we have in the project, there are so many different dimensions of performance. Surveying, water vapor, accessibility, and all sorts of things. How do you handle this very multi-dimensional space of what goes into what counts as performance? Do you try to reduce it to one sort of figure of merit? I just don't. Yeah, can you say a little more about how these different aspects are combined?
No. What I'll say is Daniel's talk contains all of those things. It's a big effort. The one I showed, which was film fraction, well, that's one. There is a lot of effort going into thinking about how to model weather. We had a question yesterday in the operation room for how much LNG time we get, how many women are there. Challenging question. We are doing our best to make sure that our models incorporate as many of those things as we can do. As the more factors that we add, the longer the simulation time, obviously, the more resources it takes to understand. But it's critical to do it right. So I'm not the expert, but you know, access to the experts.
There's a lot more talk about the project management and management processes. I'd like to know from your point of view that what would be your top three, other than the science and budget, the top three difficulties and things that you're facing?
So the top three technical issues, or just the top three from the engineering team's perspective? What are the hardest things?
Well, other than science and budgets, what would be the top three? Well, maybe not top three, top two. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you which ones keep me awake at night, if that's
right.
You know, for me, the dealing with all of the data is the thing that I think will be the most challenging. You know, in one sense, we can say, well, you know, we're quadrupling, I believe, the bandwidth of the system. Well, we can just buy more hard drives, right? And we can buy more plane tickets to move those hard drives around. We're in a weird moment, technically, where hard drives aren't going to get much bigger, and solid-state disks are getting bigger, but also very, very expensive. And so finding the sort of, and e-transfer is difficult for the amount of data that we're talking about. And so finding a satisfactory solution and trying to project into 10 years in the future what the right solution will be is the one that I personally sort of always have running in the back of my head. There are plenty of other questions. Some of them are, some of them are technical in that we say, well, look, we're going to build 10 more stations and we will have, first, in some sense, we'll have control. So we can build monitoring and control systems. You know, today, when you look at how the ngEHT operates, the monitoring and control of every station is different because they were all built at different times by different people for different purposes, and it's challenging. So we say, great, well, we're going to build 10 stations and they'll all be exactly the same. We can, have one control panel that controls all of them. That's fantastic. Well, we still have 10 more stations to think about. We still have to integrate those stations into the system as we think about new operating modes, periodic modes, observing different times of the year. We'll have to invent processes to manage those systems, and that'll be a challenge. There's programmatic challenges, the agreements that have to be reached with all of the sites, with how the EHT evolves to deal with new operating modes and new stations. That's the fun. That's why I get up in the morning, is to think about that stuff.
I think the real DA, is a good model to follow. That's what I'm going to say to you.
Yeah, we're fortunate that there are several large projects going on, or whose documentation we have access to. I guess that's another version of the how do we control the documents and the overflow of documents, as we can see how this is happening with other programs and take best practices, which in some cases means don't do certain things, and in other cases means make sure that we do.
Okay, great. Then I think we should move on. Now we have a coffee break and come back up. Yeah, we have some announcements.
Okay, so we would like to ask all the speakers about the presentation today to send their slides via Slack or email to Fabian or Ron, or to upload them directly to one of the founders in the ngEHT repository. And then we said we did an analysis challenge at the center. And also today we have some regular sessions, and they will happen in the second and answering rooms that are on the floor, and also in the auditorium. And at the end of the day, we have the poster writing talks during the auditorium